Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm very excited to show you a little swatch and review of Cirque's Glazed Holiday Collection. First of all, we have to give a huge thank you to Beyond Polish for sending these my way. Full disclosure, I am an affiliate with them and I did reach out to ask if I could receive this collection because you know I love jellies, but I also knew that you guys would be just as curious as me to see how these compare. So the full Glazed Holiday Collection features 6 new jelly polishes and 4 toppers, 2 of which are re-releases. I believe the jellies are also being sold as a bundle without the toppers, and they're also sold individually, of course. And like I mentioned, I will have comparisons for these, even a couple of recreation attempts, but yeah, for now, let's just get into the swatches. First up, we have Fig Jelly, which is described as an eggplant purple, which I thought was so interesting considering it's called fig and not eggplant jelly. But either way, it's a beautiful, dark, cooler toned purple with maybe a little bit of a brownish gray undertone, putting it almost in the raisin color category for me, which I have been loving this time of year. So naturally, I was very, very excited for the shade. It had a really nice formula that was easy to apply. It self-leveled pretty well for the most part, though I would say building this up in 3 coats will get you even more coverage. I think I did do a bit of a thicker 3rd coat here on my live swatch, so it looks really, really dark, but in real life you can definitely tell it has that dark purple color with some visible nail line, and that's going to be even more obvious in direct sunlight as seen here. So for my full hand swatches for this collection, or for the jellies at least, I have a regular base coat on my pointer and middle finger, but then I'm using a blurring base coat on my ring and pinky, specifically Polish for Days Briar Rose, which I think is a close enough shade to my skin tone, so it's pretty neutral and doesn't affect the color too much. And I have 2 coats of Fig Jelly on every nail, so you can probably tell that there is just a lot better coverage or a lot less visible nail line with the blurring base. Next we have Wine Jelly, which is described as a true burgundy red with neutral undertones. I guess I would say that's pretty accurate color-wise. I mean, when I think of a burgundy, I do think of a shade in between purple and red, but this is described as burgundy red, and it is very red-leaning as expected, so it pretty much just lives up to its name. The formula on this was also really nice, similar to the last shade where it was easy to apply, self-levels pretty well for the most part. I think it can definitely be passable on 2 coats, but of course that also just depends on your preference, your application, and nail length. But I definitely do prefer these just with that extra 3rd coat, just because you get a little bit more of that color saturation. And again, for my full hand swatch, I have the clear regular base coat on my pointer and middle and the blurring base on my ring and pinky. So even though you still can see some visible nail line on my first 2 fingers, I feel like it wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be, because usually when it comes to Cirque's darker jellies, they're just often very, very sheer. So I was pretty impressed with the coverage that I got on just 2 coats with a clear base coat, but I would say my preference is using the blurring base or just doing a 3rd coat to get a little bit more color and oomph. Then we have Rosewood Jelly, which is described as a pink-toned brown jelly. You already know this was going to be one of my favorites because I just love shades like this, especially for fall, and we rarely get warm-toned pink jellies from Cirque, so this was much needed in their catalog, I think. The formula was okay too, where the first coat, you know, was sheer, it applies easily, it provides a nice subtle wash of that warm pink color, but for some reason the 2nd coat I found didn't self-level as nicely as the first 2 shades. Maybe I just had too much polish on the brush and so it started to pool on the left side, but I also had a bald spot on the right side of my tip, so it definitely needed a 3rd coat to just really even out, and it also deepened the color a considerable amount, which I still thought was really beautiful and flattering. But I do really love that pinky color that you get in just 2 coats as seen here on my full hand swatch, again over the clear base coat and blurring base. I also noticed that with the blurring base, I could still see some visible nail line too, probably because this is a bit of a lighter color compared to the previous 2 shades, which were much darker. And funny enough, I thought the visible nail line was the most noticeable in lower lighting. Up next we have Amber Jelly, which is described as a deep orange jelly. This one was surprisingly sheer, as you can see on the first coat here, where it's just barely giving that wash of orange color. I wouldn't say it's the most flattering shade to wear in just 1 coat, but of course it is going to look better once you do build it up in 2 and especially 3 coats. Though again, because the shade is just so sheer, the visible nail line was the most prominent, I would say, where this is one of the most true, like very glassy, translucent kind of finishes. So your visible nail line is gonna be there clear as day, no matter how many coats you do. And even using a blurring base coat, I feel like did not help at all. I just don't know if I did a much thinner coat for my blurring base, since my visible nail line is just so apparent here. But I would say an even bigger drawback to using the blurring base coat is that it actually altered the color. So hopefully you can tell on my ring and pinky finger, it's a little bit more yellow leaning, where you just kind of lose all that dark, warm amber color as you see on my first 2 fingers, which look much closer to the color you see in the bottle. Then we have Forest Jelly, which is described as a deep blackened green. So I thought that was a pretty great color description because it does seem like a very neutral shade of green to me, just, you know, very dark. So Forest does feel like the perfect name for this one. And yeah, as expected, because this is a darker jelly, it does have a little bit more of that really sheer kind of finish on the first coat, but it does build up a good amount on the second coat, where you do get a lot more color and a little bit more coverage, but you know, there's still visible nail line, of course, and doing a 3rd coat deepens the color even more. But again, if you do look close enough, you still can see some visible nail line because Cirque's jellies are always going to show that. And here is my full hand swatch with 2 coats over the clear and blurring base coat. I found this was most similar to fig or wine jelly, for example, where the blurring base did a great job at blurring my visible nail line without affecting the color at all. And rounding out the new jellies is Charcoal Jelly, which is described as a light charcoal gray. And it is definitely a light shade. You can see this one is, I would say, the most sheer on the first coat, or even just the most sheer in general. But it does have a nice formula that was smooth, easy to apply. Again, generally even coverage. I wasn't super crazy with how it looked on the second coat, mainly because it was so incredibly sheer. But I did think it built up better in 3 coats because, again, the color just intensifies a bit more. You get a little bit more even coverage. So I think I would say this was most similar to Amber Jelly for me, where it's just a very glassy, sheer kind of jelly polish that will show straight through to your visible nail line no matter how many coats you do, unless of course you are using a blurring base. I think I was most impressed with how much the blurring base helped this shade specifically, because with some of the other shades it made sense because those were a lot darker, so you're just not going to see as much visible nail line. It's easier to obscure, but you can just tell like the straight up difference between the amount of visible nail line from just my middle finger to my ring finger. And here are my full hand swatches of the Glazed Holiday Collection, again in 2 coats each over both a clear base coat and a blurring base. So to correct myself from earlier, I think I would say that Charcoal is definitely the most sheer, then followed by Amber. And here I decided to do an extra 3rd coat just to show you a little bit more of that color difference. I just really loved how much more saturated the colors get with that extra 3rd coat. The first of the two returning toppers is Azúcar from the Jarritos collab last summer. This one is an iridescent hex glitter mix. So it's not holographic, not metallic. The glitters have a translucent kind of quality to them, but they are still very colorful and sparkly. And like other iridescent kind of toppers, it's gonna pop the most over darker shades. So here I have it swatched over white, black, and forest jelly. And the other returning topper is Lumière, which is a dainty gold scattered hollow topper. Rest assured, if you do get this one, it will come with the wide paddle brush. This is just my original bottle from a few years ago. But even with the skinny brush, it had pretty great coverage. You can see it's decently packed with those gold scattered hollow glitters. I think my phone was struggling to capture the gold coloring it has, but I think it's most noticeable over wine. One of the new toppers is Clair de Lune, which is a dainty silver scattered hollow topper. I was honestly surprised to see this because I just figured Cirque already had something like this in their collection, but apparently not. And yeah, it's your pretty standard run-of-the-mill scattered hollow topper, so it's cute. I especially love this one over Rosewood. It's just such a classy combo. And the last new topper we have is Starlight, which is a rainbow reflective glitter topper. Definitely an accurate description for this. There's really not much else to say. It's a reflective glitter. It is rainbow, though I will say I didn't notice a lot of blue or green in here. It was very pink and silver heavy, though maybe that'll be more obvious in the comparison portion later. And yeah, like with other reflective kind of toppers, it's not going to look the best over lighter colors, but it does look great over darker shades and especially over flash. But even without flash, you do get a nice sparkle. And lastly, here is a skittle of the 4 toppers worn in 1 coat each over black, since I thought that was the clearest way to see them. It still might be kind of hard to tell, but hopefully you can see that Lumière is a little bit more gold yellow in color compared to Clair de Lune being that silver scattered on my ring finger. And as expected, the hollow is going to show up the most in direct sunlight or under flash. If you're in indirect lighting or in lower lighting, you really lose all of the sparkle in Lumière and Clair de Lune, but I think it's still pretty noticeable in Açúcar and Starlight. Though Açúcar is going to look the best in lower lighting, and of course Starlight is going to look the best under flash. Finally, moving on to comparisons, we're starting with fig jelly, and I first pulled out Bitten jelly on the left but realized it was much too pink, so on the nail I decided to just compare it to royal jelly, being the darkest purple that they have. It doesn't quite compare to fig, so I thought I could try to recreate it by layering royal over Bitten, but that just was not close at all. So I actually don't have Açaí jelly anymore. That came out earlier this year, but this one is a dark purple, kind of similar in color, but a little bit cooler toned and maybe more muted. Here's fig next to ILNP's Honeymoon, which I thought was going to be a little closer, but that one's a bit more pinky, almost more similar in color to Bitten jelly. So for some closer ILNP shades, I pulled out Annabelle and Nightshade, which was their most recent dark purple jelly, though it is very, very dark and much more opaque. Annabelle is also an incredibly dark purple, and I don't think I ended up comparing it to Nightshade, so hopefully this comparison here helps too. But yeah, here I'm showing them in 1 and 2 coats, and you can just see there's a very clear difference in their coverage, but also their color too, so they're not even close. Since fig was kind of giving me raisin color vibes, I thought I could show this next to KBShimmer's A Raisin to Live, which I shared in my fall favorites for this year. Obviously, it's packed with a silver, chunky, hollow glitter, so you know it's not going to be a dupe or anything, but even aside from that, color-wise, KBShimmer is a bit more warm toned, which is most obvious on its first coat here, and it looks kind of similar in value to 2 coats of fig, but once you add the extra coat for both, they look pretty different. Next for wine jelly, here it is next to Mxcn Cola jelly, originally from the Jarritos collab, but I'm pretty sure it's available permanently now, and Bonbon jelly. Both of these are similar, where I would say that wine jelly is almost a perfect in-between of these shades. I'm showing 2 coats of each, and Mxcn Cola is just a bit more sheer, while Bonbon is similar in terms of value, but more brown in undertone. So I thought that maybe layering Mxcn Cola over Bonbon would make a pretty close dupe for wine jelly, but just doing 1 coat of each wasn't enough, so doing a 2nd coat of Mxcn Cola made it a little bit closer, though not an exact dupe. And for some other dark red jellies, I have ILNP's Dahlia from their Thorns collection, which again is a lot more pigmented, so I'm only going to be showing 1 coat of that, but even still it's a bit more berry leaning. And then I pulled out Cracked Polish's Cordially Invited, which is much closer in terms of that dark wine red with a little hint of a brown undertone, but it's a little bit lighter, so not an exact dupe. Since A Raisin to Live was a little bit warmer toned, especially on the first coat, I figured I could show that next to wine jelly, and here it is next to ILNP's Merlot from last year's Vineyard collection. Obviously from the name alone, that one is also a wine-inspired color, but again, it is a little bit too light, I would say, where whether you do 2 or 3 coats, Merlot just has a bit of a brighter or truer red kind of color. Wine jelly just has a little bit more depth to it. Next for Rosewood Jelly, here it is next to Hearth and Marsala Jelly. So I figured Rosewood would be kind of an in-between of these 2 shades, even though that might sound crazy because obviously on camera, Rosewood looks a lot more similar to Marsala. And it definitely is in color, but then once you see them on the nail, you can see how Hearth Jelly is almost the same exact value as Rosewood, while Marsala is a few shades deeper. So again, I figured I could try to recreate this by doing 1 coat of Marsala over Hearth, which was still a little too corally warm, so doing a 2nd coat of Marsala helped bring it closer to the color of Rosewood, but it was just a little bit too dark. Some other jellies I was reminded of included Crack's Simply Mauvelous and ILNP's Rosalie, but as I'm sure you can tell, neither of these really compare. Crack's is just more of a true mauve shade, it's a bit more muted and also a lot lighter. Rosalie is a little closer but warmer, slightly more terracotta. Next for Amber Jelly, here it is next to Jarritos and Saffron Jelly, which are 2 other Cirque orange jellies, but these definitely don't compare. Jarritos might be closer, at least compared to Saffron, but it's still too bright. So for some closer, darker orange jellies, I thought to compare ILNP's Hidden Path and Amber, which is a magnetic, but it does have a dark orange base. But both of these ILNP shades are just a little too dark compared to Amber. And speaking of amber, I pulled out Cracked Polish's Hot Honey since that's described as an amber jelly, but as you can see, it looks almost mustard in color. It's very yellow leaning, so I thought for a slightly more orange jelly, I could show it next to Crack's I Am What I Am, which I would say looks pretty close, though in real life, Cracked is a little bit darker and more yellow. Moving on to Forest Jelly, the other closest dark green jellies from Cirque are Toronja and Verdigris jelly, but as I'm sure you can see, neither of those are as dark as Forest Jelly is, though on the nail, when you do 2 coats of each, I could see how Verdigris is a similar tone or value, but it's a very different color. Here it is next to Cracked Polish's No Shrubs, which is their dark green jelly. This is pretty much similar to Cirque's Kelly jelly, by the way, where it's more of that true mid-toned grassy green kind of color, so it's not really the same shade as Forest. Then for ILNP, I wanted to quickly show this next to Countryside, which is a dark green jelly, but that's a lot more olive in color, so it has this yellowy brown sort of undertone. So I thought maybe Ivy from their Thorns collection would be a little bit closer in terms of the color. Obviously, it's a bit too dark and pigmented, but even color-wise, I feel like it's not as close to Forest as I thought it would be. Next for charcoal, I of course am showing it next to NSFW jelly from Cirque, which is just their black jelly. And for a true gray jelly, I have Crack's Dark Like My Heart, which in the bottle definitely looks like an exact dupe, being this, you know, medium dark charcoal gray. But on the nail, you can see the difference with how sheer charcoal is. Although maybe it is like a trick of the light, because once I did adjust my nail around to see Dark Like My Heart straight on, it did look kind of similar. Then for Lumière, I pulled out Cirque's Nectar, which is a gold topper, but it's not holographic at all. I wouldn't call it a metallic either. It's almost just a shimmer, and it has a bit of a brighter yellow gold color. So for an actual gold hollow scattered topper, I pulled out Cracked Polish's Truly Outrageous, which unfortunately is not around anymore, but I would say that one is the closest to being a dupe. So if you do already have that one in your collection, you don't need Lumière. Though I will say that Cracked was a little bit more sparse and with maybe a slightly larger glitter particle. Next for Clair de Lune, here it is next to Nimbus, which is one of my favorite toppers. It's basically the silver version of Nectar, so it's not holographic at all. So for some actual silver scattered hollow toppers, I have China Glaze's Fairy Dust, which is a classic, and Mooncat's Moon Dust, which is another scattered hollow topper. Like, they're just all the same. Though I guess Mooncat is a little bit more sparse, while China Glaze has that same density, but they are all very dainty. And lastly for Starlight, here it is next to Holo Taco's Disco Dust Taco, which is their rainbow reflective topper. I know in the bottle they definitely look very similar, where they have that predominant silver and pink kind of coloring, but the difference is a lot more obvious under flash, obviously, where you see more of those rainbow sparkles, and at least to me, I could see a little bit more of the blue and green, like full rainbow spectrum in Holo Taco. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Cirque's glazed holiday collection. As always, I can't wait to hear what you think of this release, because as expected, I am generally really loving them. I'm sure you already know how I feel about Cirque's jellies, where I generally am a big fan of them, and even in general, they just dominate the jelly market with their color range. But surprisingly, they don't have a lot of these darker kind of fall colored jellies. I feel like this lineup really reminds me the most of their very first glazed collection, I think from 2021, which included shades like Marsala and some other, you know, more muted kind of colors. But since then, they've released so many other jellies that are just usually a lot brighter, which, I mean, to be fair, I love those a lot too. But yeah, in general, I was happy to see this kind of color range being added, because I feel like it just fleshes out a little more of their catalog, which again is already pretty expansive. The formulas are pretty much no different than what you would expect for Cirque jellies, where they're just very fluid, very glassy looking. And after trying Starly's jellyfish kind of jellies, I think I do prefer the Starly formula more, where maybe it's not like the actual formula, like how they apply, but Starly is just generally a bit more pigmented, which I think I just prefer that. But it really does depend on how you're using the jellies, because obviously for Cirque, them being a little bit more sheer kind of lends itself to be better for layering, I would say. So, you know, pros and cons to each, right? But overall, I do really like them. I love this color palette. I think they're so beautiful, especially for this time of year, which actually kind of goes into my only criticism, I guess, if you could call it that, where this is not the color palette that I would think of when I think of holiday. I don't think I'm alone in saying that this color selection is just very, very fall coated in general. The only holiday thing about them are maybe the toppers that are included. So yeah, definitely an interesting choice there, because they've done really nice holiday collections in the past that have felt more holiday than these, in my opinion. And as far as the toppers go, they're okay, you know, like they're not bad by any means, but they're not the most exciting shades either. It's interesting to see them do more re-releases again, though I'm not too mad, especially at Lumière, because I feel like that one's the more unique one, where at least I don't really have anything comparable, or the one that I do have, being Crack's Truly Outrageous, is not around anymore, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is like another indie brand that does offer a gold scattered hollow glitter topper. So even though they are cute for like the holiday kind of vibe, they're not that exciting at the end of the day. I mean, at least for me, I am a lot more excited about the jellies, even though again, not really giving holiday. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on these, especially if you have picked them up. But in case you haven't, you can shop these on Beyond Polish. Like I mentioned, I am an affiliate with Beyond, so if you do shop through my link or use my discount code, not only will you save some money on your order, but it'll also give me a small commission, which greatly supports me and my channel. So as always, a big thank you to all of you who do support me through that. But even if you don't plan on picking anything up, or again, if you did already get these, I would love to hear your thoughts down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!